Hi everybody, you're watching the video walkthrough of the quick and dirty guide to traversing NFTs to another chain. What this is an article written by yours truly that gives a step-by-step breakdown of how to mint an item on one chain and transfer it over to another. For example, you mint an item on Ethereum and you want to send it over to Avalanche, you can do it. Or if you want to mint an item on Binance Smart Chain and send that over to Phantom, you can do that too. Now, why would anybody want to do this? I do not know, but it sounds pretty cool to me. So let's dive in to how. So this is all made possible by a company called Layer Zero and what they have built called the Omnichain Interoperability Protocol. Now, before you let that turn you off, yes, I said company. So that means, yes, this is a third party. And I know that might turn off some people with their Web3 ethos of trustlessness, myself included, but I encourage you to dive into their documentation and see how they did it, because they did, in fact, build this in a way where you can perform these operations in a trustless manner. I'm not going to dive into how. This is the quick and dirty guide, but again, I encourage you to look into it. Now, there are many projects already building on top of this solution, including DeFi applications, but today we're going to go over NFT projects. So two examples I'd like to bring to your attention are a project called Ghostly Ghosts, and this was the first NFT project to take advantage of Layer Zero's Omnichain protocol, and another one called Tiny Dinos. These are two of the more popular projects, Layer Zero projects out there. And Tiny Dinos, as you can see, these guys are pretty cute, and they have an property here called Minted On. And what this means, Layer Zero at the moment supports 7 different blockchains: Ethereum, Avalanche, Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, Arbitrum, Phantom, and Optimism. And they're going to add more chains in the future, but right now it's just those 7. But you can see here, even though we're looking at the Ethereum version of the contract, some of these guys were minted on Avalanche, Binance, Polygon, Arbitrum, and so forth. And basically what we're doing is you have an NFT contract, and there's essentially 7 different copies of it, one living on each of these chains. And then Layer Zero provides the mechanism for those to communicate back and forth to each other. Now, unfortunately, what you can't do is take an existing NFT you have. For example, if you have a Bored Ape, you can't send that over to Polygon. And the reason why is that contract was not built on top of Layer Zero's solution prior to deployment. It's something you need to build into your contracts before you deploy. This is not something we can do after the fact. But if you want to follow along, I definitely encourage it. And these two projects are both minted out, but that brings me to the right-click save project, which I'd like to introduce you to. This is a project that I built, and one of our collections is a collection called OmniSticks. Now, what this is obviously, they're little stick figures. Not the most impressive artwork you may see out there, although I think these are pretty cool. This is basically my way of exploring Layer Zero's Omnichain solution, and ideally, it's your way to follow along and have an item for yourself and transfer it from one chain to another for yourself. These are completely free to mint. So this is a low-cost way of introducing yourself to the Omnichain NFT projects. And optionally, you can tip me, but again, totally optional. So we're going to start by minting an item, and then we're going to transfer it. So let's start by minting our item. I'm already connected to the Phantom network. Let's double check that in my browser wallet. Yes. Now, let's go ahead and select it here. Like I said, there's 7 chains: Ethereum, Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum, Binance, Avalanche. We're going to select Phantom, and we're going to connect our wallet. Here we go. Now we're connected. The tip amounts will populate. Again, optional. You don't have to use them. And let's hit mint. This might take a second. Okay. It's the middle of the day, so gas prices are higher than it would be at night, but let's click confirm. Now we wait for that transaction to settle. Okay, so we know our item minted. You can see right here, the mint was successful. And let's view this on Block Explorer. And we can see here that we minted item number 40,007. Let's look at this on an NFT marketplace for Phantom. And you can see here, I already refreshed this previously. You can see here it lives on our Phantom contract. But if we double check the Polygon version of this contract and a marketplace, we can see it does not live here. And there are some items from other chains that we did transfer over previously, but 40,007 is not one of them. And that's what we're going to change with this discussion. So now we're going to break the rest of this talk down into 3 parts. Number 1, we're going to do a little bit of initial setup, just to enable us communicating with layer 0. Then we're going to transfer the actual item from Phantom to Polygon, and then we're going to double check our work and see that it did in fact get transferred over to here. So let's get started. Okay, so before we transfer our item, we need to do 2 checks to make sure that we're ready to go and that our transaction will happen successfully. Now, when you build your NFT project on top of Layer 0's protocol, and they have great examples on their documentation and their GitHub that you can just clone and build on top of, which is what I've done here. And with that out of the box, you will have inherited some extra functions from Layer 0. Now, one of those is a function called isTrustedRemote. Now, basically what this does is it tells you if the contract you're about to interact with is approved for you to interact with. Now, we're going to have to do this on both sides. So in Phantom, we have to check, is the Polygon contract a trusted remote? And again, on Polygon side, we're going to have to check that is Phantom a trusted remote. Now, this takes in 2 properties. Number 1 is our source chain ID. A quick note about these IDs. You might be familiar with something like this, which is, each EVM network has their own chain ID, unique chain ID that you can use in your applications as you try to connect to them. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is a Layer 0 specific chain ID that they use for their own internal contracts. So and that can be found here, and I'll link this in the description, but this is their documentation. And right now we're going to need the Polygon chain ID, which is 9. And again, notice that is not what it is here for 137. We want the 9 from the Layer 0 version of the chain ID. So we're going to add this here. And then it says source address. What that is referring to is the actual contract address of the other contract. So in this case, our destination contract. And we're going to add that here. And we want this to return true, which it is. So let's do it for the other side on Polygon. So what do we want? We want the Phantom chain ID, the Layer 0 chain ID for Phantom, which is 12. Enter that in here. And the source address is the Phantom contact address. And we'll enter that here. Again, we want this to return true. Now, if either one of these operations were to have returned false, do not continue. Now, that shouldn't happen with our Omni6 projects because I have set the remotes for every combination of contracts. But if this happens on another project, if you're the owner, go ahead and set the remote. If you're not the owner, contact the contract owner, and hopefully they can set the remote for you. But in our case, we are clear to proceed. Now, that brings us to item 2, which is checking for a payload. Now, what this means is a stored payload, and we're going to do that on this contract. Now, this is the Layer 0 endpoint. And again, we can find that in the same page, same documentation. And for our purposes, we only need the endpoint of the destination chain, which is Polygon, and Phantom's our origin chain. So I already have that up here in a Block Explorer for you here. This is called what Layer 0 calls their endpoint contract. And it's essentially again, quick and dirty guide, not too much detail. This is a middleman contract between our destination contract. I'm sorry, our source contract and our destination contract. And that has a function called has stored payload. Now, what this is suppose you sent an item before and that transfer failed for some reason. This contract is going to store it. And if it has a stored payload, it's essentially, we can say, blocking the pipes for future transactions. So if we have a stored payload, our transfer is going to fail. So let's check and make sure that there is no stored payload. So that's what we're doing here. Now, this again also takes into two parameters. Number one is a source chain ID. Now for us, that is going to be Phantom. We already know that to be 12. And again, that's doing the layer 0 chain ID and the source address. And this is actually referring to your wallet address. So let's grab that from right here. And that is false. And that's what we want. And again, if this returned true for any reason, do not continue. Find out how to clear it. You might have to resend or retry payload. There's ways to do it that we're not getting into today. But if you get true for this function, do not try to transfer another item because it will fail. Okay, so now that we have our preliminary steps sorted out, now we're going to make the actual transfer from Phantom over to Polygon. Now, there is a preliminary step that we need to do, and that is called estimate send fee, which is a function we're going to call on the source contract. Now, the reason why we do this is because layer 0 requires that when you communicate between chains, you have to send a little bit of gas from the source chain to the destination chain, and that's going to allow them to do some extra processing on the other side. So we need to estimate how much it should cost, and we're going to send that amount along with our request to transfer an item. So this takes in about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters. The destination chain ID, which we already know the layer 0 chain ID for Polygon is 9. Let's add that. To address, this is going to be our wallet address because we're sending this to ourselves. Let's grab that. Token ID, if you recall, was 40,007. Now, these last two parameters, we're not going to get into. We don't really need them for our purposes. So we're going to put in what essentially amounts to default values. We'll use false for U0, adapter param is just, basically an empty address. And we're going to send query. Okay, now this returns to us how much gas we're going to send. Now, fear not, this is not the amount of gas. So for I don't know how long this number is, but this is not asking us for, whatever it is, 500 billion, of the native token. This is the lowest denominator they have. So we need to multiply this by 10 to the 18. So I'm going to do a bit of counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This is 17 digits here. We're going to add one more in front. So ultimately, it's going to be 0.0575, etc. We're going to round up to 0.056. And that's what we're going to use here and send from. I'll put that in number 4, I forget. Send from. This is the meat and potatoes. This is the crux of what we're doing. This is what's going to send our item from one chain to another. So we put in a little bit of extra gas. We're going to need a from address. And again, this is just our wallet address. Same thing for to address and refund address. We'll use it there too. Destination chain ID is Polygon. Layer 0 chain ID is what we want here. Again, we already know that to be 9. Token ID, I believe is 40,007. Yes. Token ID, 40,007. And again, last two parameters, same thing. We're going to put what amounts to empty values. These don't really pertain to our purposes today, and I'm not going to get into why we need them. 0 payment address. I'm going to use the standard 0 address for any EVM chain. stack the parameters again, just put an empty value here. And oh, before we do, let's connect our wallets. All right, now we know we're connected. We're going to click right. Wait a minute. I don't have enough gas. Something's wrong here. All right, let me figure this out and get back to you guys. Okay, so we're back. I think what happened was the amount of gas estimated increased as I was talking. So I put in the parameters again, and we're just gonna hit confirm before this thing changes its mind. Oops. Oh. Okay. So let's wait for this to complete, for this transaction to complete successfully. There we go. Confirmed. View an Etherscan. Okay. Now the transaction should be confirmed. Let's we can double interact with the contract directly to check something. So let's go back to our read contract section and let's look for token URI. Now we minted an item on Phantom, which we see here, and ideally this should no longer live on the contract. So we put in 40,007. This should give us an error. There we go, because it no longer exists there. Now if we do this on the Polygon side, again, recontract, token URI, 40,007. This should give us an actual URI. Okay, there you go. So now I know our item 40,007 no longer lives on Phantom. It does live on Polygon. And we can double check this by going to our marketplace. Now this 40,007 should disappear when I refresh. Okay, so I had to pause the recording because sometimes these things take a little while to transfer. And I wanted to make sure that the transaction completed. Anyway, so we moved our item. We already confirmed via the contracts that this item no longer lives on Phantom, but it does now live on Polygon. So let's check our Polygon collection. 22 items. This is before I refresh. Nothing with a blue background. Now let me refresh the page. It now says 23 items. And let's let it load. There we are, stick figure number 40,007 on the Polygon contract. And you can see in the properties that the birth chain is Phantom, but it does in fact live on Polygon. And for whatever reason, this, I think it's the platform is not recognizing the fact that maybe it just doesn't support omnichain projects, but the item is still here. And it's just not being recognized that is no longer on the chain. But if I will notice this, that if we click on it, the section where it says owned by is empty. So I think that helps us confirm that it's no longer there. So let's pick another one that still lives on Phantom. You can see it's owned by an actual address. So as far as I'm concerned, we are verified that the item has officially been removed from Phantom and transferred over to Polygon. And there you have it. We have traverse chains with our NFT. And oh, look at that. It has the logo where it says blockchain Polygon. And that's it. I hope you guys get a chance to mint one of these again for free for yourselves. Try it, transfer it, play around. I think I spent probably the equivalent of less than $2 in fees for transferring everything. And so have some fun. Enjoy. Take care. My name is Eric, and I will work for CryptoPunks. So long.